This is by far the biggest crowd I've ever talked to, so you're part of history for me at least. Okay, so we'll get started. So to introduce myself real quick, my name's Seth. I'm a registered dietitian who's been here maybe like a month and a half now, for a couple days a week. And today I have the privilege of talking to you all about diets, textures, and food safety, everyone's favorite topics. So without further ado, we'll get started here. Here's a little bit of what we're going to be going over. Start with nutrition risks and then all the way down to safety and sanitation. It's a lot of information for kind of a short period of time, so I might go pretty fast, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those at the end. Okay. So before we get going, here's a few facts about nutrition in the elderly, just to give you guys an idea of why we're talking about this. So on average, about 14% of long-term care residents are malnourished, with another 53% at risk for becoming malnourished. So chances are you work with someone who's malnourished. 90% of older adults are deficient in vitamin D. So you think of bone health with vitamin D, falls and fractures. We see that a lot. 30% are deficient in B12. B12 is really important in red blood cell growth and development, so anemia, also see that a lot. 30% have inadequate zinc and selenium intake. 50% eat less than the RDA for protein. Zinc and protein are really important in skin health, so things like pressure wounds, wound healing. And then finally, older adult malnutrition costs about $51.3 billion per year and causes a 300% increase in healthcare costs. So definitely a very important topic in healthcare and among our residents. Okay, so nutritional risks. So what puts all these residents at risk for becoming malnourished? Nutrition risk is any condition that increases a person's likelihood of not meeting their estimated nutrition needs. So here are some common causes: poor appetite, chewing, swallowing issues, mouth sores, ill-fitting dentures, nausea, vomiting, and then loss of independence. So if they're in a long-term care facility, their chances are they have some form of loss of independence. So really all of those things, if they're a resident here, they are probably at increased nutrition risk. There's another really obvious cause that I didn't put on here, that is weight loss, of course. I don't know why I forgot that, but there's a reason that we weigh our residents every month, because that can be a big red flag. So I won't go through all of these, but I just want to kind of put them in your mind so when you're working with residents, you can kind of think of it in terms of nutrition risk, so maybe you'll see some of these things or notice them a little bit more. So some less obvious causes of nutrition risk: depression, medication side effects, that's really common. Eating disorders. What I mean by subclinical is you've probably worked with a resident who maybe has very particular food preferences or will only eat certain things. So it's not really an eating disorder, but nevertheless, it really does put them at increased nutrition risk because they're not willing to eat as much as they otherwise would. So you can see I won't go through all of them. Another one is activity level. You don't really think of nursing home residents as being very active, but what if they wander all day? They're burning calories the whole time they're wandering. Or if they have tremors, and so they're constantly moving, that's burning calories too. So it's not just, nutrition risks aren't just about eating less or residents eating less. It could also be they need to eat more because they have increased energy needs. So the bottom line there, many factors affect a person's nutrition. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. So I mentioned this is one of the causes earlier, the chewing and swallowing disorders. I wanted to go in a little more depth about because we're talking about textured diets. So So swallowing is a really complex process. Obviously, if you think about swallowing or just focus when you try and swallow, you kind of realize that a lot goes into it. So it requires all sorts of nerves and muscles to fire and kind of sync up in harmony. So dysphagia simply means difficulty swallowing, and some causes you can see here. Probably the most common ones we see are stroke and maybe dementia. But even things like loss of muscle mass, you don't really think of the muscles in your face as getting weaker, but that can certainly happen and then cause swallowing or chewing disorders. So why are we so concerned about chewing and swallowing? Well, it increases the risk of aspiration or food or liquids going down the wrong pipe. And that, of course, puts them at risk for things like pneumonia and other medical complications. So we address that, of course, the speech therapist. We have a speech therapist here who works with chewing and swallowing disorders. So they get therapy, have eating techniques for safe swallowing or chewing. And then, of course, modified texture diets. Yay. All right. So here are the modified texture diets we have here at the Mennonite Home. I want to go down to the last bullet first. Textures are a doctor or speech therapy order. So you have to kind of treat it like a medication. It's not at our discretion to pick and choose what they can eat. That's something that's already been prescribed and laid out. So if, for example, a resident is on a puree diet, but you think maybe they can have something, it's not up to you. Let someone know so it can go through the proper chain and be addressed in the right way. Okay, so I'll briefly cover the 3 modified texture diets we have here. And you can kind of see the pictures to go along with them. Puree, or it's also referred to as dysphagia 1 in a lot of hospitals. All foods must be blended to achieve that smooth, moist consistency. You can swallow it easily without ever having to chew. And then, of course, no whole foods, it's all pureed. You can kind of see up there, a lot of residents don't like this, obviously, because it's not real appetizing to look at. And nevertheless, it can be very helpful for people who can't chew very well or swallow. So next up is the dysphagia mechanical soft, or dysphagia 2. And really what it is, if the first one is puree, everything is ground. So it's just kind of a step up. Nothing is hard or difficult to chew, so no skins, no seeds, no raw fruits or vegetables, and then gravy and moisture with all the food. So that should really go for the puree as well. Gravy should be on there. So dysphagia mechanical soft usually is a transitional diet from puree to mechanical soft, which is mostly chopped foods. So you can kind of see there in the progression, everything's a little bit more intact. Mechanical soft, chopped meats, everything still needs to be fork tender. No raw fruits or vegetables. So all the fruits are canned or cooked except for bananas since they're already very soft. Okay. Any questions about the modified texture? Yeah.
Is ice cream okay or not okay?
Oh, here. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. So thickened liquids, they kind of go hand in hand with mechanical altered or texture altered diets. In addition to thin liquids, there's nectar, honey, pudding, and spoon thick. And you can kind of see down at the bottom there what those would look like. So nectar kind of drips off the spoon. Honey is like a consistent stream, and then pudding is really you're drinking a chunk. You're not really drinking, you're eating. So of course, not all liquids thicken the same here. We have things like apricot juice that are already nectar thick, which is great. But if you are thickening a liquid, you want to add the thickener to the liquid, not vice versa, when you're stirring it in, and then wait a little bit, stir it in again to be sure you get that really even texture and make sure it's the right consistency. And never give ice cream or Jell-O, because what happens to ice cream when it heats up? it melts, and then it's no longer a thickened liquid. And then finally, sometimes the speech therapist will order a free water protocol. I have seen this here. So what it is the resident could drink thin liquid, so regular water, but at a set time. So normally you can't have that regular thin water while they're eating food. It's just like a controlled, they're able to have that regular water at a controlled setting. Okay. So next up, therapeutic diets. Before we go into the therapeutic diets we have here, I just want to talk a little bit about the liberalized diets and the liberalized diet philosophy, which is really big in the long-term care or nursing home setting. So, and the idea behind liberalized diets is that everything should be as least restrictive as it possibly can be. And we do that in order to promote residents' ability to make decisions about their food so they can eat what they want to eat. It improves dietary compliance, resident satisfaction, improves the appearance and flavor of food. You're not restricting everything and taking out all really the good stuff from food. It improves intake because residents are eating what they want to eat. And in doing so, improves weight and nutritional status. And then finally, it decreased labor and food costs. So the kitchen isn't having to prepare 10 different meals at the same time for all the different diet restrictions that every resident is on. So the bottom line behind liberalized diets, residents have control over what they eat, and that's really important. That being said, we do have a couple therapeutic diets here, and really it is up to the residents to follow these, but we do have a couple things. So the first is the no added salt diet, and this is to help with residents, say, who have hypertension, fluid retention, things like kidney disease or heart failure where they retain fluid really easily. So limiting the salt so that fluid isn't staying on them as much. And what we do on a no added salt diet, we're offering Mrs. Salt packets instead of regular salt. We try and flavor food with things like herbs and spices versus salt. Obviously, we prepare everything from scratch here so we can control what goes into it. So processed foods, if you didn't know, tend to have way more sodium than regular foods, or than regular, foods made from scratch. So that's kind of what we do as far as the no added salt diet. Residents can also take this into their own hands, choose to avoid foods that are really high in salt, so breakfast meats, potato chips, condiments, dressings, canned soups, cheeses. You can see them all there. And choose those lower sodium foods like fresh fruits and vegetables, etc. So that's the no added salt diet. Next up, the low concentrated sweets, kind of also the diabetic diet, used to help diabetics manage their blood sugar levels or control weight if weight loss is desired. So what we're doing with the low concentrated sweets diet, we're offering small portions of desserts. I didn't put this on here, but typically we try and include about 4 servings of carbohydrate foods per meal. So kind of keep that blood sugar steady so they're not getting 2 servings of carb and then 10 and the blood sugar spiking. I also can talk to residents about, the benefits of their diet restrictions, help them make better choices. So, have another serving of veggies instead of those 3 servings of mashed potatoes or whatever. And then we can take preferences so they can kind of choose what they get to eat and make better choices. And then, of course, residents can also take this into their own hands. They can practice portioning their carbs, limiting, controlling how much of it they eat, making better food choices. And then, of course, the dietitian on site here can also see anyone who has any questions about controlling their diabetes with diet. All right. So next, fortified foods. This is really, it's not really a diet per se, but we use this for residents who say aren't getting enough calories or protein in with the regular foods here. So really it's just beefing up the normal foods we have here. So we're enriching foods that are already provided. So things like doing whole milk instead of 2% or skim milk, adding sugar, cream to cereals. You can kind of skim through the list here. Just adding calories however we can to kind of beef up those foods if someone's not getting enough in otherwise. And then, so we like to do food first. Hopefully everyone gets their needs, meets their nutrition needs through food. But if not, we do have nutrition supplements here. I'm sure everyone's familiar with them. MedPass, we have two types, regular or no added sugar. No added sugar would be what we send for the residents on the diabetic or no concentrated sweets. Vanilla flavored, it is lactose, gluten-free. It is okay for those nectar-thick residents on the thickened liquids. And to give you an idea of how much it is, it's either 480 or 400 calories. If it's no added sugar, it's 400 calories. And then 20 grams of protein per 1 cup. So that's a lot of nutrition in a very small package. So that's why we use it. There's also the Orange Resource. So MedPass is like a milkshake. Orange Resource is kind of the juice, citrus version of it. And it has a little bit less to it, so 250 calories, 9 grams of protein, but still a good choice if someone needs to get a little more calories and protein in. So next up, assistance and adaptive equipment. So these are the things we can do outside of food to help residents get enough to eat. So how are we helping them? And I didn't really list off the adaptive equipment, but you can kind of see a few examples here. There's the scoop plate in the middle, the section plate, I'm not sure what it's called. And then the built-up handles are sometimes weighted handles, so weighted utensils can all help residents eat independently, so we don't have to feed them. I mean, I'm sure they'd rather eat independently as well. So what are we doing to help them? Well, during setup, we should be doing these things, offering to clean residents' hands at the table, making sure that these adaptive utensils are set up correctly so that the residents can use them. So are they right or left-handed? Well, we need to make sure, the utensils are on the right side. The scoop plate doesn't do a lot of good if it's facing the wrong direction and the food can still fall off. And then making sure they're seated correctly so that they can reach all the food that they need. And that goes to trays delivered to rooms as well. So if they're in bed, are we setting up the tray so that they can reach everything and not have any problems with eating? And then, of course, we provide help. I always offer to cut up meat, give water at the table along with other beverage options, cool down hot beverages if they need that, and then describe food. So if they're visually impaired somehow, let them know what's in front of them. All right, so next up, safety and sanitation. A few more facts for you guys. Just to put it in perspective, so failure to wash hands contributes to about 50% of foodborne illness outbreaks. And 1 in 3 diarrheal-related illnesses and 1 in 5 respiratory infections can be avoided by proper hand washing. Damp hands spread up to 1,000 times more bacteria than dry hands. So if you don't dry your hands after washing your hands, it's almost as bad as not even washing your hands in the first place. And there are 40,000 to 500,000 bacteria per square centimeter on the hands of medical personnel. And 26% of hands were found to have fecal contamination present. So, yeah, you'll never look at your hands the same way again now. And then finally, women wash hands significantly more than men, so good job, ladies. All right. So hand washing, when are we washing our hands? Well, in all these instances right here. So before handling food or clean equipment, utensils, dishes, anything that the resident is going to be touching or that food is going to be placed on. We're washing hands after touching hair, skin, or clothing, after using the toilet, obviously, handling soiled silverware, utensils, handling garbage, after coughing, sneezing, blowing nose, and then after touching residents or any of the residents' belongings. So if you're going in delivering a tray and you have to move things around, well, you should wash your hands before delivering the next tray to the next resident. So how should you wash your hands? Seems intuitive, but maybe not. Wet hands with running water, lather soap in warm water for at least 20 seconds. I've heard sing happy birthday twice, so you can do that. And then be sure to get the entirety of the hand. Nails are the part that are most often missed, and the most difficult to clean. So focus on getting your fingertips as well as just the palm of your hand. Rinse hands with running water, and then of course dry thoroughly so you don't have that 1,000 times more likely to spread germs about. Okay, so we talked about our own hands, but what about residents' hands? They're also touching the food and the utensils. So are independent residents washing their hands before meals? Are we making sure that happens? Are we offering to help them wash their hands when they get to the dining room, and if they are unable to do so? And what if they wheel themselves in? If they're wheeling themselves, think about what they're touching on the wheelchair. They probably need to wash their hands again if they washed it in the room. Okay. And then kind of to go along with hand washing, just how we're handling the plates, utensils, and then what we're practicing when we're serving. So handle glasses and cups by the bottom without touching the rims. Who wants to eat off something that has the rim touched? Handle plates by the bottom or the edge. Keep hands off the eating surface. One thing we did in a mock survey recently, they noted is that a lot of thumbs were on the plate. So if you can keep your thumb off it, ideally you're holding the plate from underneath and not even having to worry about your thumb touching a surface food would be on. Handle soup bowls by the bottom without touching the rim. And then food should always be covered in the hallway. So if you're taking something from the dining room to the servery, it needs to be covered, and no exceptions to that. So just think, how would you want your food to be handled? Okay. All right, and a couple examples of this. So would you rather eat off A or B there? The top or the bottom? Well, that's definitely not right. Okay, so no, it's the top one. A or B, B, right? Since it's not touching the rim. And then hopefully no one's actually touching the resident's food when they bring it to them. So the bottom one looks a little bit better. All right, so in conclusion, inadequate nutrition can stem from many causes. As I said, malnutrition is really prevalent in the long-term care setting, so it's something we need to keep an eye out for. Our goals are to encourage good nutrition through those modified textures, providing therapeutic diets, using fortified foods and supplements when indicated, when people are losing weight or need that extra nutrition. And then we also want to maximize resident independence in eating and food choices, since this is their home. With that liberalized diet philosophy, we're providing assistance as needed, but not overly so. And then using things like adaptive eating equipment to keep them independent. All right, and then finally, to go along with the hand washing and proper serving, we're minimizing risk of illness through proper safety and sanitation when preparing and serving food. All right, any questions? Yeah.
Okay, back when I started, we used to have an option to have no sugar ice cream.
Right, I couldn't give you the answer to that. I think there's
Can you
probably
get the answer?
something, I guess I can look up.
I
I know
feel
we
like
used
that
to do
they
that.
don't know the difference.
Right.
If you give it to them, but, if we're trying to keep weight and sugar levels down,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
don't have enough diet options for the dessert.
Yeah,
We really don't.
right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is frustrating for sure. I think doing the half portion desserts and things like that,
Yeah, that doesn't always happen.
yeah,
I can tell you that from how they get served.
right.
So,
Okay, I can ask about it.
that would be great.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Nothing? Okay. So there's also another speaker, I think at 12:45. I don't know how early I finished. So they'll do the emergency preparedness portion of it. But thank you guys. Hope it was helpful.
Okay,
Dave, we put the mic on? Because otherwise the audio won't pick up for the recording.
is it still on?
Is the green light on top?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, emergency preparedness. What is it? Now, obviously, in the last couple of weeks, we saw all over the news Hurricane Michael and the damage that it did in Florida and up through Georgia and even up into Virginia. How do you prepare for something like that? That's what disaster preparedness is, to have a plan to, to work through that disaster. Now, Hurricane Michael, there were 2 hospitals that had to evacuate residents the next day. Why? Well, they had windows broken out from the storm. They had power out, even though they had a generator, but they had no water supply. And that was the biggest thing for them, was the lack of a water supply. But the broken windows, and we're also letting the rain into the building there. So, they had to go through an evacuation, just like we talk about, what we do if we had to evacuate, this facility or a facility. So that's why we talk about what is our plan, and what are we going to do in the event of a hurricane or a storm like that. So, like I said, to plan for a disaster. Might be natural, it might be man-made. Preparedness. FEMA defines it as a continuous cycle of planning, organizing, training, and equipping, exercising, evaluating, taking corrective action and effort to ensure effective coordination. So, that's why we have, assigned duties. Who is that event coordinator? Who's taking care of the logistics? Who's taking care of the operations? Who's taking care of supplies? Who's taking care of the money? Disaster preparedness refers to measures taken to prepare for and reduce the effects. That is, to predict and, where possible, prevent, mitigate their impact, vulnerability populations, depending on the effectivity of cope with their consequences. So, think about, we don't typically get hurricanes here, but those of you that were here in the 60s, the Columbus Day storm was a major wind event in this area. Some people were out of power for over a week. So what, let's make this interactive. If we had predicted a wind event like Columbus Day storm, what are some things you think we should do in preparation?
Maybe have some local drinking water
Okay,
in case the water source.
make sure we got food and water. What else?
Reinforce vulnerable areas of the shelter,
Shelter?
reinforcing it.
Okay. In a wind event,
Flashlights.
flashlights. There you go, because in a wind event, power's going to go out. In a wind event, also windows are susceptible to flying debris. So, in Mennonite home, you'd want to have those curtains pulled. Now, typically, hallways are a safe place. But think about our hallways in Mennonite home. What's up above the hallways? Windows. So, that's an area that we'd want maintenance to put plywood over the outside of those before the event, so that we can safely pass in the hallways during an event like that. Okay, the power goes out. What power do we have left in the building? Pretty minimal. There's no lighting in the resident rooms or bathrooms on the generator. So how do you care for that resident? How do you toilet that resident?
Something that would be really nice would be headlamps, because then you can get that and you have those hands free and don't
Okay.
have to worry about provision of
You see these boxes beside me? These are some of our disaster preparedness boxes that are kept in Central Supply. We have goggles, flashlights, headlamps, lanterns, and other things like that in there. Dining services. How are you going to feed all these people, all our residents? You see very many dining services people, but the kitchen, we do have a fair amount of power on the generator in the kitchen. The cooking areas, the refrigeration, all that is on the generator. But the dish machine is not, because the dish machine is not critical. So therefore, they would probably be serving on paper. Okay? Now, is the dining room a safe place to be in the event of a wind event? Yeah, there's, the only windows directly into the dining room are on the east side, and your typical wind events for us are from the southwest. Plus, we have some emergency lighting in there. And during the day, even if you have those blinds closed to protect the glass, and there's no electricity, those resident rooms are going to be pretty dark. And during the day, they're probably not going to want to be in there all day long. So, we need to prepare to, maybe they're spending time in the dining room. We can still do bingo, right? So something to keep residents active. But staffing is always a concern in events like that. If it's a nighttime event, how many staff are in Mennonite home? Less than 10, okay? So, but daylight's gonna come, residents are gonna wanna get up, they're gonna wanna eat, so that's why, we need staff, whether you're scheduled or not scheduled, because even some of our scheduled people aren't going to be able to get here because of trees across the road, that they can't get here. Will Janie be able to get here from SIO? Not likely. But those of us in town here are likely able to get here. So That's why it's so important, staff, if you can get here, we need you. Why do we have an emergency preparedness plan? Emergency can happen at any time, and need to be ready. Do you know where the disaster manual is? What color is it? Red. Okay? So, in the electronic age, we have stopped providing the red disaster manual with every manager and supervisor. It is now on the public drive, and any computer in the building should have access to the public drive. We'll still have hard copies at the nurses' stations, the DNS and the administrator, and at the front desk. But for the rest of us, it's not important that we have a hard copy. We have access to those few, and we do have most of our computers available to operate off of the generator power system, so you would still have access to the disaster manual on the public drive. So, yeah, you can see a list of recent events. I had talked a little bit about Michael, tremendous hardships from that. I mean, to where homes were totally destroyed, totally blown off their foundations. You know, but like I said, they had to evacuate a couple of hospitals. And last year, during hurricanes and the rain and the flooding, we saw pictures of residents in a nursing home sitting in their wheelchairs with water up to their waist. You know, how does that happen? How can you not be prepared to evacuate before that happens? But for instance, Michael came on much quicker than Hurricane Florence did. They were projecting Florence for 10 days before it ever hit landfall. Michael was less than 3 days. Before it hit, it was a tropical storm. And, you know, nobody projected that it would gain that much power over the Gulf in those 2 days. And then exactly where does it hit as far as, you know, your preparation. So that's the index for our disaster plan. A lot of different types of events. You know, when I go with new employee orientation, we even have to have a policy and procedure for a volcano. You know, some of us were around here in '82 when St. Helens blew. We got a little bit of dust. You could see it on your car here, but that was about the extent of it. But these manuals and the requirements are for Oregon, and obviously there are towns and communities that are much closer to Mount Hood than we are, and in that prevailing wind area, which is to the east of Mount Hood. So a lot of different things here, but the pandemic, you know, there's talk of the flu, and we all had our opportunity to get the flu shot, but that still can come sweeping through here, where it still affects a percentage of our staff and a percentage of our residents. So we need to be prepared with that. More policies and procedures in our disaster manual. So our recall list, and we update that pretty much monthly with phone numbers for staff and managers, so that we can call them in the event of a disaster, because we're going to need additional help. So these are broken up by department. So some people are in multiple categories, but it's designed so that depending on the disaster and depending on the department, you can find those staff that you need, because a natural gas event might only impact Mennonite Home, not Quail Run, and maybe not Lydia's house. So emergency numbers, we've got Public Works, Police Department, Human Services, Leading Age Oregon, DHS, Department of Health Services, and then we have, got a pointer on here somewhere. Oops.
It's the top button that has a little green line.
Oh, can you correct that? So, right here, we have the facilities that we have contracts with to evacuate to if we had to evacuate the building. Lynn County Emergency Services, Oregon Office of the State Fire Marshal. We're responsible to notify Department of Health Services if we evacuate, if we move our operations out of Mennonite Home for whatever reason. So an all hazards assessment. This is based on natural type disasters, hurricane, which we have zeros because we typically don't see hurricanes, tornadoes, a 1. There have been a few in the state of Oregon. Severe thunderstorms. We do get some, but more in the mountains tend to get that. Snowfall does impact us more. Ice storms is a big one for us. In the valley, we see more ice than we do snow. Earthquake is that big one. Tidal wave, not in the valley here, but of course, facilities along the coast are going to see it. Even in the event of the big one and a tsunami, impact, they say, would, pretty much in the Columbia, by the time it got to Astoria, it would be 3 feet or less. By the time it got to Portland, you'd see just a little swell and then gone. We would be impacted by the tsunami in this area. Drought, we've got 2 wildfires. We have pretty low because we're in the city and all our grounds are landscaped and irrigated, so everything's wet, green and not going to burn as quickly. Landslides, we're not in a hilly area, but there's that volcano, and we have a 1 as some impact. But the epidemic, we have a 3 there because we do see that pretty much annually anymore with the flu or an upper respiratory issue sometimes where we have to quarantine. So now this is by technological type events. Electrical failure, what's our susceptibility there? Generator failure. That's pretty low now because with the new building we're going to have another generator. We already have 2 on campus. So we have electrical fuel shortage. We have bulk storage tanks, natural gas. We have propane, bulk tank and small tanks to supplement that. Communications failure is a 3. We are so dependent on computers anymore and cell phones. For instance, during Michael, wiped out the cell towers. So no cell phone usage in that area. And until they get the antennas back up, they will not have that. And that in a windstorm type event with the power outage, even if it didn't blow the tower over, they depend on electricity to run the repeaters on those cell towers. Typically, they have a small generator on them and a small fuel tank that's going to last about 3 to 5 hours. If they can't get a service guy up there to refuel those cell towers are going to go down during a power outage. So communications is a big problem. Fire, floods, internal would be a water line break in the building. Flooding external, we do have Oak Creek on our south boundary here. In '96, when we had that March storm and all the snow melt, and we had about 6 inches of rain in this area in about 36 hours. Oak Creek got up to the bridge at Columbus. It was crossing Columbus on the south side of the bridge. And the water was up 18 inches deep through the RV storage lot. It was within about an inch of getting into one of our duplexes out in the village there. But the parking lot around Lakeside Center and the streets there had about a foot of water in them. So our biggest issue with that flood at that time was, again, staff being able to get here because roads were flooded. Janie couldn't get here from Scioto. The roads were flooded. Even Highway 34 was flooded, but since then they've rebuilt it so that it's a little higher because it flooded there in the Gultra area. That was 96. Yep. Okay. Now this list is human-related events. So this is a category that an active shooter or an intruder would be. If we had a mass casualty event, or we had a hostage situation, or civil disturbance, or labor action. If we had people out on the parking lot and street blocking our entrance and exits, and how would that impact us if we can't get our emergency services here and our deliveries and supplies? A bomb threat. Somebody called in a bomb threat. Are we going to evacuate the building, and where are we going to go with them? So that's that category. And then events involving hazardous materials. So chemical exposure, a large internal spill, some kind of radioactive material. We had some ones there. We don't think there's a great likelihood of something like that. But Portland is concerned about somebody intentionally contaminating the water supply. So, what would happen? Well, how would we deal with that? So, this is a graph showing under medical center, natural, technological, human, and hazmat. Probabilities, yellow, and the severity in brown. So elopement drills, we do in the different areas. Fire drills, do monthly throughout Mennonite Home. It's every other month in Lydia's house in Quail Run. And then evacuation drills, which we did one recently with the local fire department and paramedics. We might think that it'll never happen here, but if it does, what are we going to do? Oregon does experience weather conditions that are unusual. You know, tornado near Lebanon in September 17, severe thunderstorms at the coast. You know, wildfires, we're seeing more and more throughout Oregon. And it can happen in the valley, you know, during the harvest season when all the fields are very dry. You know, it could be all around us and it could impact us because it could burn power lines and poles and such. You know, in January 17, Portland had a very big snowfall. We had one a couple of years ago that we had about 18 inches of snow. And we got the worst of it from Philomath, Corvallis, and through us. We had 18 and Salem had 6. And above Salem, there was virtually nothing. So, you know, it can happen isolated to us. And that's when myself and a couple other of us with our four-wheel drive trucks were going around and picking up staff that we needed, you know, to get in here to help out because, like I said, you get during that daytime event, people need care and need to be fed, and so we do what we have to do to get staff in here to do that. Questions?
I have one. So you said that there's flashlights in these totes?
There are headlamps.
Headlamps, okay.
Now, maintenance and out in our electrical supply room, we have about 24 flashlights. We don't put batteries in these cases because batteries' life expectancy, you know, just sitting is
Right. So
not great. But central supply and maintenance always have cases of batteries in stock.
And that was the main part of the question I didn't finish.
Yeah.
Is what about batteries? Because I know we have flashlights on and none of them work.
Yeah, and part of the licensing with the new building was that we had to have flashlights. You know, the administrator has to have one, the DNS, and the nurse's office. We put in those plug-in ones that plug into the wall, so they're constantly charged. So if the power goes out, it actually lights up a night light, and then you can grab it and turn it on. But it only is going to last so long until it goes out, and you have to be able to plug it in to charge it back up. But we do have a number of flashlights around, and we do have batteries by the cases. So, but yeah, each one of these cases has a list on the side and on the top as to what's in it. And like I said, we have the 3 of them. You know, it has those aluminum thermal blankets, goggles, headlamps, gowns, gloves, masks, because we have stuff related to pandemic, you know, flu type things rather than just a power outage. But this is just, you know, basic. We have a lot more in central supply, and depending on the event, we're going to have to get more of some of these things. But these are a startup. And this is Mennonite Homes. Lydia's house has a stock, and Quail Run also has a stock. Other questions? So, you know, it's why if there's any kind of event forecast, you should always make sure your gas tank in your vehicle is full. Make sure you have water and batteries and flashlights that are working, a radio that works off of battery. You know, but be aware and equipped, and please try to get into work if you can. I mean, I know loved ones are first priority, but we need you here in the event of basically any kind of disaster. We need staff. Okay, thank you.